Welcome back to Future Talk, where Bryce Doherty's in discussion with Sally Loane.
Okay, Sally, so let's talk about technology. Superannuation, compulsory superannuation's been around since 1992. Back when it first started, you'd go to your advisor, they'd go and fill in a whole bunch of application forms for the various fund managers that they were investing you with. Move forward to platforms emerging in the late 90s, which really was something to help the advisor rather than the client, although you did get some pricing advantages for the end client out of using platforms. But if we look at the technological advance of superannuation since 1992 and maybe contrasting that with what's happened with banking, what do you see happening in the near future with technology enabling better engagement from consumers with their superannuation?
We've seen some very small players, some digital super funds, leap out of the blocks because there's a whole lot of technology that's been going on behind the scenes which has enabled them to actually come into the market, which I think is a really good thing, because we want millennials, we want young people to engage with super from their very first job. So they understand it, they know where it's going, and they understand compounding interest. The only way we'll do that is if we introduce some really good digital tools for them to do that. So there are some super funds out there that are starting to do this, which is fantastic. I think a lot of the problem at the moment is there's still big barriers to entry, those big compliance costs, the need for wet signatures, the need for paper. We've still got that in financial services, and that is a drag on efficiency.
What can government and the regulators do to help us with that? I mean, it's quite amazing, right? You can go onto your bank app and use your thumbprint on your phone, and you can get access to all of your funds and move money around, and yet we're still talking about wet signatures in superannuation.
Yeah, I can even go on my phone and get my facial recognition, which is even better. Our payment systems are fantastic. Why can't we just shift those across to financial services? And I think the government's starting to look at this. They want new players in the market to attract market share, to get eyeballs, to get engagement, and that can only be a good thing. When people start engaging and thinking about their financial futures, we've got to give them the right tools.
And look, I really agree with you that as at entry level to get engagement moving, tech is a great way to do that. What about at the other end? What about with these 700 Australians retiring a day? What can we be doing there better? I hate this word robo advice. I think it leads everyone to this view that you'd sit down with a touch screen and suddenly all your problems are solved.
Or a robot comes into the room and
That's right. And we know that particularly that generation that's retiring now, more than any other generation, is more inclined to want to deal with a human rather than a piece of software.
Yes.
But what can tech do at that end to help moving into retirement incomes?
Look, I think it can work up to a certain point. A lot of people will just go out there and use Google. How do I invest? What do I do? And that will throw up some options. They might go onto their bank apps, or they might look at their superannuation apps, and they'll get to a point where their bot will say, you need to speak to a human now. That is critical. I would not be wanting to go into retirement with any form of money without speaking to an expert. I think that face-to-face contact with somebody who's been in the sector for a long time and understands the complexity of all the taxation implications, all the things that the ordinary mortal can't possibly do. And I don't think technology has got us there. It can take us so far, but in the end we will all need to see an experienced advisor.
What about the risk and the risk of letting people have too much choice and too much access and too much ability to move things around? I mean, we know that it's investing for the long term. People going into superannuation today are going to spend 40 to 50 years invested in their superannuation, and maybe making changes every other week is not the best thing for them to do.
No, it's really hard. When you're a young person, you can't recognise yourself as an old person. It's like a stranger. You don't know that person, so you're not thinking about the future. When you finally do become that older person, I think you're more conservative. I'm not sure that everybody is going to be moving stuff around and looking for a lot of radical things when they're in their 60s and late 50s. I think people naturally become more conservative because mortality comes upon us. We think, my goodness, I've got this amount of money, I want to make it last. I will be a little bit more conservative. I don't think there's such thing as too much choice. I know it does get confusing after maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, funds to choose from, but I still think choice is essential in our market.
I'd agree. I mean, I think that there's no doubt that the amount of choice and the number of suppliers, if you like, in the superannuation system here in Australia has led to very good outcomes for consumers as far as competitive pricing. And I think that the amount of choice that we've given people means that fund managers like ourselves at UBS have to compete really heavily to get those dollars.
Absolutely. We have one of the most competitive markets in the world for funds managers. This is a big pool of superannuation money here. Everybody's competing very hard for that pool. You're absolutely right. I think where we get added costs in the system that don't help consumers is where we get all of those big compliance and regulatory costs. Yes, we've got to have regulations, we have to protect people, but there's got to be a balance between making advice unaffordable for Australians. We don't want to go down that path.
No, I totally agree. It's been really good to talk to you again, Sally.
Thanks,
Talk again soon.
Okay, thank you.
With the statistic that 700 Australians are retiring every day, it's more important than ever that we get our super system ready for the future. The conversation Sally and Bryce had helps us think about what next.